My son started fussing the second my mother picked him up. Not crying. Leo had a stronger survival instinct than that already. He just made those short, irritated little noises babies make when something feels wrong and they don't have the language to explain it yet. The nursery suddenly smelled like Marilyn's perfume instead of baby lotion and warm formula bottles. Expensive white flowers. Powder. Something sharp underneath it that reminded me of hotel lobbies where nobody actually relaxes. She stood beside the rocking chair holding a christening gown across one arm like museum staff transporting a historical artifact. The thing looked older than most marriages. Ivory silk, tiny pearl buttons, handmade lace cuffs so fragile they could probably dissolve during a strong argument. My grandmother supposedly smuggled it out of Charleston in the early 70s, wrapped inside a fur coat during a hurricane evacuation. At least that was the version Marilyn preferred after her third glass of Pinot Noir. The gown smelled faintly of dried lavender and cedar from decades inside a locked chest at the Cross family estate. Marilyn adjusted the lace collar against Leo's chest with careful fingertips that never quite touched his skin. She kept hovering over him instead, like contact might stain her manicure. Then she leaned back slightly and studied his face in complete silence. His dark hair bothered her first, then the olive skin, then the fact that my son looked exactly like my husband. Julian walked past the nursery doorway, carrying a half-assembled diaper caddy and a Phillips head screwdriver between his teeth. He taught high school history, but somehow attacked IKEA instructions like he was preparing military field equipment. "You need the wipes on the top shelf?" he asked. "Yeah." He nodded once and disappeared down the hallway. Marilyn waited until his footsteps faded. Of course she did. She finally handed Leo back to me with the same expression people use when returning soup at a restaurant because it arrived lukewarm. "It's a shame he doesn't carry the true cross blood," she whispered. Not sad, not emotional, just disappointed, like I'd failed quality control. I took Leo from her without answering. His little hand grabbed the collar of my sweatshirt instantly, bunching the fabric in his fist while his breathing settled against my chest. 3 months old, and he already knew who felt safe. Marilyn smoothed imaginary wrinkles out of her cream cashmere sleeve. Well, genetics can be unpredictable. Apparently, she ignored the tone completely. That was another talent of hers. The nursery walls were still unfinished because Julian and I spent most of our savings on the actual baby instead of pretending we lived inside a magazine spread. One corner still had paint samples taped to the drywall. The rocking chair came from Facebook Marketplace. The changing table had a drawer that only opened if you lifted slightly from underneath. Marilyn looked around the room the same way TSA agents inspect suspicious luggage. "I still think the sage green was a strange choice," she said. "It was on clearance." "Yes," I assumed. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because at some point your nervous system stops distinguishing between irritation and entertainment. Leo started chewing on the sleeve of my sweatshirt while staring at the pearl necklace around Marilyn's throat. "That necklace still fake?" I asked. Her eyes snapped toward me immediately. There it was. Tiny victory. The pearls were real, technically. But Marilyn hated the story attached to them because my father bought them during a bankruptcy year when the family quietly sold half their investments to keep appearances alive at Crestview Country Club. "You always did enjoy being disrespectful," she said. "No, I enjoy accuracy." She folded the christening gown carefully back into tissue paper. Every movement looked rehearsed, controlled. Marilyn could probably announce a terminal illness with proper posture and a polite smile. "The baptism guest list," she said, changing subject smoothly. "Audrey noticed you left off the Whitmores. I've met the Whitmores twice. They've known our family for decades." "Good for them." Her jaw tightened slightly. That was the closest thing Marilyn Cross ever had to openly losing composure. Down the hallway, Julian dropped something heavy and muttered, "You have got to be kidding me." I smiled before I could stop myself. Marilyn noticed that too. "You could have done better for yourself," she said quietly. I looked up. "Excuse me? He's a teacher, Evelyn. He's a good man." That wasn't the discussion. There it was again. That same cold little adjustment she made any time somebody brought humanity into one of her social calculations. Julian walked back into the nursery holding the diaper caddy sideways. "I won the battle," he announced. "Lost 3 screws and most of my dignity, but technically I won." Leo made a soft, happy noise when he heard his voice. Marilyn noticed that too. Julian kissed the top of my head before taking the baby from my arms. Leo immediately relaxed against his chest like somebody unplugged his stress. My husband looked at Marilyn politely. You want coffee before you head out? Oh no, she said quickly. I promised Audrey I'd stop by the spa before dinner. Of course she did. Audrey treated skincare appointments like emergency surgery. Julian nodded and bounced Leo gently while heading toward the kitchen. I heard him talking softly about baseball scores and diaper prices like Leo was a tiny, exhausted accountant. Marilyn watched him disappear. Then she looked back at me. You know Audrey already has 3 families asking about reserving tables for her baby shower? She asked. The Reynolds family alone sent over 2 Tiffany bassinets. Sounds practical. She inspires people. I stared at her for a second. Not angry yet. Just tired in a very old way. You ever notice, I said calmly, how nobody in this family can mention Audrey without sounding like they're introducing royalty? She represents this family beautifully. And what do I represent? Marilyn didn't answer immediately. That told me enough. Finally, she picked up her handbag and slipped the tissue-wrapped christening gown inside with careful precision. You were always different. The word hung there between us. Different. Not brilliant enough to brag about. Not broken enough to fix. Just permanently outside the glass. She walked toward the front door in silence while I stood there listening to Leo babble softly from the kitchen. Right before leaving, Marilyn stopped near the entryway mirror and adjusted one diamond earring. Make sure he stays out of the sun, she said. His complexion already runs dark. The door clicked shut behind her. I stayed completely still for about 5 seconds. Then Julian leaned halfway around the kitchen wall holding Leo against his shoulder. Your mom say something insane again? I looked at my son's sleepy face resting against his dad's chest. Then I looked at the closed front door. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel hurt. I felt alert. Have you ever spent years trying to earn love from people who only cared whether you matched the family brand? Comment below. And if you enjoy stories about quiet revenge, complicated families, and people finally choosing self-respect over approval, subscribe to the channel. I stood at the kitchen counter rinsing formula residue out of a bottle while Julian walked slow circles around the living room with Leo asleep against his shoulder. The apartment finally felt quiet again after Marilyn left. Not peaceful, just less expensive. Julian glanced toward the front window. Think your mom would notice if I billed her for emotional damages? She'd ask if your insurance covered pre-existing conditions. He laughed once under his breath. That was another reason I married him. Julian never tried to compete with my family. Most people did. They either got intimidated or started performing like circus animals around Marilyn and Audrey. Julian just stayed normal, which, in the Cross family, practically counted as rebellion. I stacked the clean bottles upside down beside the drying rack while Leo made sleepy, little grunting noises from the couch. 3 months into motherhood, and I still checked his breathing every 20 minutes like a rookie trauma nurse. My life used to involve classified network vulnerabilities and overseas security briefings. Now I spent part of every morning debating whether baby wipes were actually disappearing faster, or if diaper companies had invented new physics. Honestly, both felt equally corrupt. Julian sat beside me at the counter and slid over his laptop. School district payroll finally fixed the overtime issue. How much? $382. I nodded seriously. We're basically oil tycoons now. Easy there, Rockefeller. We both smiled. Then my eyes drifted toward the hallway where Marilyn had stood, holding Leo like contaminated evidence. The smile disappeared. Julian noticed immediately. You okay? Yeah. You sure? No, but I'm functional. That's usually your code for give me 10 minutes before I start planning a military operation. 15 minutes today. I'm tired. He squeezed my knee once and let it go. No lecture, no forced comfort. Julian understood something most people didn't. Some wounds get louder when people keep touching them. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the grocery receipt sitting beside the fruit bowl. $86.14 for formula, oatmeal, frozen vegetables, coffee, and diapers. I remembered Marilyn once spending $900 on custom floral centerpieces because the hydrangeas at Audrey's engagement dinner looked visually fatigued. Different planets. Audrey grew up learning which fork belonged beside oyster plates. I grew up learning how to stay out of everyone's way. When Audrey turned 16, Marilyn flew her to Geneva for a 6-week etiquette program that sounded suspiciously like rich people prison. Audrey came back speaking bad French and criticizing restaurant napkins. When I turned 18, Marilyn handed me a Samsonite suitcase and asked if Army barracks allowed outside linens. That was the entire goodbye conversation. I enlisted 3 weeks later. Best decision I ever made. Not because military life was easy. It wasn't. My first deployment rotation smelled like diesel fuel, overheated wiring, and 20 people sharing one industrial coffee maker that probably violated the Geneva Convention. But at least the rules made sense. You did your job. You protected your people. You earned trust through competence instead of bloodlines and country club seating charts. Nobody cared where your ancestors vacationed in 1924. They cared whether you could keep communication systems secure during an active breach. I got good at that. Very good. By 26, I was working cyber network defense operations for Army infrastructure teams in places where air conditioning was considered a luxury item and generators randomly died during sandstorms. I spent entire nights tracking intrusion attempts while eating peanut butter crackers from vending machines that sounded like lawnmowers. Meanwhile, Audrey was posting engagement photos from a botanical garden wedding that reportedly cost $45,000. I know the exact number because Marilyn corrected someone at dinner who estimated 30. 45 before alcohol, she clarified proudly, like discussing a historic architectural restoration. The wedding had violinists hidden inside hedges, literal hedges. I missed part of the reception because a secure satellite relay system crashed overseas, and my team had to isolate a malware intrusion before it spread through regional communications. Nobody in my family asked about it afterward. Audrey did ask if the desert ruined my skin, so that was thoughtful. Leo started crying softly from the living room before Julian even had time to stand up. I reached him first automatically, lifting him against my chest while he rooted around sleepily looking for a bottle. His weight settled into my arms naturally now, warm, trusting, real, not performative. That was the strange thing about becoming a mother. I suddenly understood how unnatural Marilyn always felt. Everything with her had conditions attached. Praise came with comparison. Love came with expectations. Even kindness arrived like a business transaction. I carried Leo toward the bedroom while Julian heated another bottle. The hallway flickered slightly because our apartment building was approximately 9 electrical failures away from condemnation. We kept meaning to move somewhere bigger, but childcare costs laughed directly in our faces every month. Still, I felt safer here than I ever did inside the Cross estate. That house always felt cold in ways central heating couldn't fix. I remembered last Thanksgiving with uncomfortable clarity. 42 guests, imported candles, crystal wine glasses, polished by catering staff wearing white gloves. Marilyn had insisted on assigning seats using handwritten name cards because apparently chaos begins when dentists from Connecticut accidentally sit near investment bankers from Charlotte. I showed up directly from Fort Eisenhower after a 12-hour security audit. Audrey looked me up and down while sipping champagne. "You still have that army posture," she said. "Very rigid. Sorry my spine disappointed you." Several people laughed quietly. Audrey smiled wider. "Honestly, Evelyn, I still think you inherited some random Penzant genes somewhere down the family tree." I kept eating. Bad sign. Normally, I would have answered, but I was tired enough to recognize where the conversation was heading. Audrey leaned toward one of her friends. "Look at us. Same parents, completely different outcomes." Marilyn actually laughed, not awkwardly, not politely, genuinely. Then she dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin and said the sentence that kept replaying in my head long after dinner ended. Well, bloodlines always reveal the truth eventually. Nobody reacted. That was the worst part. Not one person at that table thought the comment crossed a line, because by then everyone had accepted my role inside the family ecosystem. Audrey was the polished heirloom, Marilyn was the queen maintaining standards, and I was the strange branch nobody discussed directly. I remembered sitting there, listening to silverware scrape against china while something inside me finally stopped trying. Not emotionally, strategically. There's a moment during cyber threat analysis when you realize the problem isn't random system instability anymore. The pattern becomes visible. The behavior suddenly makes sense. That Thanksgiving was the moment I stopped seeing my family as difficult and started seeing them as deliberate. I stopped reacting emotionally to my family the same way bomb technicians stop panicking around exposed wires. Panic wastes time. Pattern recognition keeps you alive. 3 days after Marilyn's visit, I sat at my kitchen table with Leo asleep in a carrier against my chest while reviewing medical intake forms on my government-issued laptop. Not real intake forms, templates. I built fake administrative scenarios for a living whenever I needed to test network vulnerabilities during training exercises. Most people thought cyber defense was about aggressive hacking and dramatic code screens. Honestly, it was mostly paperwork and psychology. People hand over sensitive information surprisingly fast if the request sounds official enough. Leo shifted against my chest, making soft little snoring noises while I typed. Julian walked into the kitchen wearing gym shorts and one sock. You planning world domination or paying bills? Both, probably. Healthy balance. He opened the fridge and stared into it like fresh groceries might magically appear through prayer. You want me to grab dinner tonight? He asked. Depends. Are we rich today? He checked his banking app. Current financial status says maybe Taco Bell if nobody orders a drink. Luxury. He kissed the top of Leo's head before leaving for school. The apartment got quiet again, except for keyboard clicks and the washing machine struggling for its life in the hallway closet. I finished building the framework carefully. Department of Defense Dependent Medical Review. Updated hereditary risk assessment. Expanded genetic history panel due to late-onset cardiac concerns in paternal line. It sounded boring enough to be believable. That was important. The best lies never sound exciting. I stared at Marilyn's contact information for a few seconds before hitting call. She answered on the fourth ring. Evelyn, not hello. Just my name, like she was being informed about a scheduling conflict. I need 10 minutes of your time this afternoon. That depends entirely on why. There's an updated medical review. Requirement connected to my clearance renewal and Leo's dependent records. Silence. Then immediate interest. Government affiliation always impressed Marilyn. Not because she respected public service. She just enjoyed proximity to institutions that sounded prestigious. What kind of review? Expanded genetic documentation. Mostly preventative screening. Dad's cardiac history triggered additional flags in the system. That part was technically true. My father died at 58 after ignoring chest pain for 2 days because apparently wealthy, Southern men considered basic survival a sign of weakness. Marilyn sighed dramatically. Honestly, the paperwork surrounding your career never ends. Occupational hazard. What do you need from me? Simple cheek swab for the maternal medical tree. Another pause. I could practically hear her ego processing the sentence maternal medical tree. Marilyn loved documentation, legacy, recorded lineage. Anything that made her feel historically significant. Will this become part of a federal database? She asked. There it was. Medical archive system, yes. Well, her voice softened slightly. I suppose accuracy matters with these things. I almost laughed. Accuracy. That word again. We arranged to meet the next afternoon at the Cross Estate because Marilyn claimed the country club. Renovation noise was psychologically exhausting. I drove there after dropping Leo at daycare on base. The estate looked exactly the same as always. White columns, circular driveway. Landscaping so aggressively maintained it resembled artificial intelligence trying to recreate nature. 2 gardeners trimmed hedges near the fountain, while Marilyn's black Mercedes sat freshly washed beside the entrance. Money never slept at that house. It just rotated outfits. Marilyn met me in the sunroom, wearing cream slacks and gold bracelets that softly clinked every time she moved her hand. You're late. I checked my watch. It's 2:03. Yes, late. I handed her the sterile collection kit. She examined the packaging carefully. This looks surprisingly cheap for federal medical equipment. Taxpayer optimism has limits. That earned the smallest smirk. She opened the kit while I sat across from her at the glass table. Behind her, workers cleaned the pool even though nobody had swum in it since September. Everything in Marilyn's world existed for appearance first, function second. Rub the swab along the inside of your cheek for 30 seconds, I said. You sound thrilled to be here. I sound efficient. Military life really did drain all softness out of you. I watched her complete the swab slowly, like royalty signing wartime legislation. You know, she said while sealing the sample tube, Audrey already submitted genetic screening before her fertility consultations. Of course she had. People like Audrey approached reproduction the same way luxury buyers approached horse breeding. Everything came back excellent. Marilyn continued proudly. Exceptional markers across the board. Congratulations to the family bloodline. She missed the sarcasm completely, or ignored it. Hard to tell with narcissists. She handed me the plastic vial with visible satisfaction. No hesitation, no anxiety, just confidence. Marilyn Cross genuinely believed science would formally certify her superiority if given enough opportunities. You should consider having yourself screened more thoroughly, she added. There are clearly traits in your appearance that never align strongly with the cross side. I slid the vial into the collection pouch carefully. Interesting observation. Well, honesty matters, sure. Now it did. I finished the paperwork at her kitchen island while she instructed catering staff over speakerphone about Audrey's upcoming baby shower menu. Apparently, cucumber sandwiches could become a family crisis if the dill ratio was incorrect. I left 22 minutes later. The second I got inside my car, my entire body changed gears. Emotion off, procedure on. I drove directly to a private shipping store 6 miles away instead of using anything connected to military systems. Independent chain location. Older clerk. No self-check kiosk cameras. Habit. Cyberwork teaches you strange things about data trails. The DNA lab operated out of Denver under the name GenPath Diagnostics. Full private analysis package, $350 plus expedited processing. I paid using my personal debit card. The receipt printed at 4:17 p.m. The clerk slid the priority mailer across the counter. Anything fragile? Just family problems? He laughed way harder than the joke deserved. Outside, the afternoon heat hit like opening an oven door. I drove to the USPS drop box near a grocery store parking lot and sat there for a moment with the package resting on the passenger seat. 32 years of confusion fit inside one padded envelope. Not pain anymore, not resentment. A question. That was the shift I couldn't explain to myself yet. Because deep down, some part of me already believed there was an answer waiting inside those lab results. I stepped out of the car and dropped the mailer into the blue USPS collection box. The metal chute squeaked shut behind it. And just like that, the entire thing stopped being emotional. It became data retrieval. The email arrived while I was cleaning dried formula off my keyboard with a cotton swab and a level of concentration usually reserved for bomb disposal. Subject line: GenPath Diagnostics report available. Time received, 11:45 p.m. Leo had finally fallen asleep 40 minutes earlier after treating bedtime like active resistance training. Julian was passed out on the couch with grading papers spread across his chest and a documentary still playing quietly on the TV. Some British narrator was explaining medieval farming practices to an unconscious public school teacher. Very on brand for my husband. I carried my laptop into the spare bedroom we used as a home office and shut the door halfway behind me. The room smelled faintly like printer toner and cold coffee. One wall held my military certifications in plain black frames. The other had unopened diaper boxes stacked beside an unplugged treadmill we bought during an optimistic life phase. The overhead fan made a soft clicking sound every 11 seconds. I noticed because my brain always cataloged environmental patterns when stress levels climbed. I sat down at the desk and opened the encrypted email. Password-protected PDF. Two-factor authentication. Professional formatting. GenPath Diagnostics didn't mess around for $350. For a second, I just stared at the download icon. Not nervous, exactly. More like standing outside a room where you already know the conversation is about to change your life. Then I clicked. The report opened across 17 pages filled with medical terminology, hereditary markers, probability tables, and laboratory claims written by attorneys terrified of lawsuits. I skipped almost everything. No hesitation. Straight to the kinship analysis section. That was the only part that mattered. The table loaded slowly for half a second. Then the numbers appeared. Paternal relationship analysis. Probability of biological paternity between Thomas Cross and Evelyn Cross. 99.99987%. Expected. I barely reacted. Then my eyes dropped to the next line. Maternal relationship analysis. Probability of biological maternity between Miracle Sangsa and Evelyn Cross. 0.00%. I stared at the number for so long my eyes started watering from not blinking. Not possible. Then immediately, no, completely possible. I reread it 3 times anyway. 0.00%. No partial match. No inconclusive result. No laboratory ambiguity. Nothing. The report continued underneath with sterile explanatory language about incompatible genetic markers and exclusion certainty thresholds But my brain stopped processing complete sentences after the second paragraph. The overhead fan clicked again. 11 seconds. Click. My entire childhood rearranged itself in under a minute, not metaphorically, literally. Every interaction, every insult, every cold smile. Every strange imbalance between Audrey and me suddenly snapped into alignment with horrifying mathematical precision. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't overly sensitive. I wasn't defective. I was evidence. That was the real problem. I leaned back slowly in the chair while memories started surfacing faster than I could organize them. Marilyn refusing to display my school photos beside Audrey's piano recital portraits because the frames didn't match aesthetically. The way relatives always commented on my darker features, like discussing weather damage, the endless references to bloodlines, legacy, breeding. God, these people talked about genetics like racehorse investors. I remembered being 12 years old at Crestview Country Club during a family dinner when one of Marilyn's friends smiled at me politely and asked, "Which side of the family do you favor?" Before I could answer, Marilyn said, "That's always been the mystery." Everyone laughed. I laughed too, because I thought that's what you were supposed to do when adults humiliated you softly enough to call it humor. Jesus Christ. The room suddenly felt smaller. I stood up and started pacing automatically, laptop still open on the desk behind me. My father knew. Of course he knew. Thomas Cross spent 32 years watching Marilyn raise another woman's child inside his perfect socialite fantasy because admitting the truth would have detonated the family reputation. And Marilyn. I stopped walking. That was the part that hit hardest. Marilyn wasn't my mother, not emotionally, not biologically, nothing. She was a woman forced into permanent proximity with her husband's affair. Every single day of my life, every birthday party, every graduation photo, every holiday dinner. I wasn't the daughter she failed to love. I was the consequence she never forgave. The realization should devastated me. Instead, it chilled me. Like finally locating the source of a system breach after years of unexplained corruption. Everything made sense now. The criticism about my appearance, the obsession with Audrey's elegance, the way Marilyn always treated me like an unwelcome guest who overstayed decades ago. She wasn't protecting family tradition. She was protecting herself from public humiliation. And somehow that made the whole thing uglier. Because buried underneath all the cruelty was something painfully human. Humiliation calcified into resentment. Resentment turned into ritual. I sat back down slowly and reread the report again from the beginning. The science was airtight, collection verified, maternal exclusion confirmed, no viable biological relationship. My phone buzzed against the desk. "Julian, you alive in there?" I stared at the text for a second before answering. "Yeah." 3 dots appeared immediately. "Everything okay?" I looked back at the PDF, at the 0%, then at my reflection faintly mirrored in the dark computer screen. For 32 years, I thought I'd spent my life failing some invisible test inside my own family. Turns out I was never supposed to pass. I opened the bedroom door and walked into the living room. Julian sat up instantly when he saw my face. "What happened?" I handed him the laptop without speaking. His eyes scanned the report quickly, then slower. Then he looked up at me carefully, like I might physically break apart if he moved too fast. "Oh my God," he said quietly. I sat down across from him while the documentary narrator continued discussing medieval grain storage in the background. Normal life kept moving. That part felt insulting somehow. Julian rubbed one hand over his mouth. "Evelyn." He didn't answer, because he knew it too. I leaned forward with my elbows on my knees, suddenly exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. "She spent my entire life punishing me for existing," I said calmly. "And the worst part is, I finally understand why." Julian stayed silent for a moment. Then he asked the question nobody else would have thought to ask first. "What are you going to do?" I looked toward Leo's bassinet beside the couch. My son slept peacefully through all of it, one tiny fist curled beside his face, 3 months old, already more loved than I'd been at 32. And somewhere deep inside me, underneath the shock and anger and confusion, another feeling started settling into place. Clarity. Cold, precise, complete. The kind that changes power permanently. I buttoned the manila folder closed while Leo slept against Julian's chest on the couch. Neither of us spoke for almost a full minute, not because there was nothing to say, because saying it out loud made everything permanent. Julian finally looked up at me. "You don't have to go tomorrow." "Yes, I do. Audrey's baby shower is not a military operation." "No," I said calmly. It's worse. There'll be floral arrangements. That got a tired laugh out of him. Then he looked at the folder again. You planning to confront her there? I'm planning to stop pretending. Important difference. The next afternoon, Crestview Country Club looked exactly like the kind of place that charged $18 for cucumber sandwiches and still managed to act humble about it. White stone entrance. Valet attendants in pressed green jackets. Fresh hydrangeas lining front staircase despite the fact half the city was under water restrictions. Money always finds hydration. I parked my aging Honda Accord between two luxury SUVs that probably cost more than my annual military housing allowance and sat there for a second adjusting the folder on my lap. The laboratory report rested inside beneath a plain legal pad. No dramatic red marker, no revenge speech, just evidence. I walked into the ballroom at 1:07 p.m. The room smelled like champagne, vanilla candles, and expensive women pretending not to judge each other. About 40 guests floated between round tables covered in ivory linens and gold-trimmed place settings. Silver platters carried miniature cucumber and dill sandwiches with the crusts removed so aggressively they looked medically sanitized. Every woman in the room wore some variation of pastel confidence. Soft pink, powder blue, cream. The entire ballroom looked like an Easter advertisement directed by narcissists, and there was Audrey, standing near the gift table in a pale lavender maternity dress, with one hand resting delicately under her stomach like she'd invented pregnancy personally. "Oh my God," she said when she saw me. "You actually came. Legally, nobody could stop me." She air-kissed my cheek without making contact. "Family tradition. You could dressed up a little more," she added quietly. I looked down at my charcoal slacks and black blouse. "I'm mourning the death of my enthusiasm." Audrey blinked once, deciding whether I was joking. She never fully understood sarcasm unless it came from rich people magazines. Marilyn approached before Audrey could answer. Cream-colored dress. Diamond earrings. Perfect posture. She looked like the human embodiment of generational judgment. "Evelyn," she said smoothly, I'm glad you made the effort. I almost admired her commitment to performance. 3 days ago, I learned this woman spent decades resenting my existence because my father cheated on her. Today, she was hosting a luxury baby shower with imported macarons. Human beings are incredible. "I brought a gift," I said. "I'm sure Audrey will appreciate that." Marilyn's eyes briefly dropped toward the manila folder in my hand, then away. No concern, no instinct, nothing. That almost made me angry again. Not the cruelty, the confidence, the absolute certainty that she would never face consequences. A waiter passed carrying champagne flutes. I grabbed sparkling water instead. Military habit. I liked staying sharper than everybody else in the room, especially today. I moved toward a corner table near the windows while conversations floated around me in soft, polished waves. Private schools, vacation properties, Pilates instructors. One woman spent 6 straight minutes complaining about yacht upholstery. I spent 4 years sleeping beside server racks in desert heat while monitoring intrusion attempts from hostile networks. Different ecosystems. Across the ballroom, Marilyn worked the room flawlessly. Hand touches, controlled laughter, strategic compliments. Watching her operate socially was like watching a politician campaign for re-election. Every interaction calculated, every expression rehearsed. And suddenly I noticed something strange. Now that I knew the truth, Marilyn's behavior looked less powerful, more desperate. That changed everything. A string quartet started playing near the stage while catering staff refreshed the dessert display. Audrey moved from table to table opening gifts dramatically enough to qualify for regional theater. Oh my God, monogrammed burp cloths. Oh wow, personalized silver rattles. At one point, she held up a baby blanket and nearly cried because the stitching matched the nursery wallpaper. Meanwhile, Julian and I still owned exactly 4 towels that matched each other. Life comes at people differently. At 2:12 p.m., Marilyn tapped a spoon against her champagne glass. The room quieted immediately. Of course it did. People like Marilyn spend entire lives training others to stop talking when they raise a hand. She stepped onto the small stage, holding a microphone, while Audrey stood beside her, glowing with expensive moisturizers and inherited confidence. "I just want to thank everyone for being here today," Marilyn began warmly. Polite applause. I took a sip of sparkling water. Ice shifted inside the glass. Marilyn continued. "Our family has always believed that motherhood is more than a responsibility. It's a privilege passed carefully from one generation of cross women to the next. There it was. Cross women, not daughters, not family. Bloodline branding. Several women nodded approvingly like she was delivering wisdom instead of selective breeding propaganda. Marilyn smiled toward Audrey. My mother taught me elegance. I taught Audrey elegance. And now Audrey will pass those same values down to her daughter, not her child. Her daughter. Very important distinction in Marilyn's world. The room hummed with approval again. I stayed still. Very still. Strong families survive because they protect tradition, Marilyn continued. Grace. Discipline. Heritage. Then she looked directly at Audrey while speaking into the microphone. True family is built on pure blood, and I am so proud to see our legacy continue perfectly in you. The sentence landed softly across the ballroom. Nobody reacted, because nobody else knew what it really meant. But I did. I looked at Marilyn standing beneath crystal chandeliers, talking about pure blood, while the DNA report sat 15 feet away, inside my folder, proving she had built her entire identity on a 30-year lie. My fingers tightened slightly around the water glass, not shaking, steady. That was the terrifying part. I wasn't emotional anymore. I was finished. The ice clinked sharply against the side of the glass as I set it down on the table. Several heads turned toward the sound. Good. I stood up slowly. And for the first time in my entire life, Marilyn Cross looked genuinely nervous when she saw me walking toward her. I kept walking while 40 wealthy women silently tracked me like a tennis match. Nobody understood yet. The ballroom suddenly felt hotter. Not physically, socially. That weird pressure rich people create when they sense embarrassment approaching the property line. Marilyn still stood on stage holding the microphone, but her posture changed slightly when I reached the front table. Tiny shift in the shoulders. She recognized danger. Not the truth, just disruption. Evelyn, she said carefully, smiling for the audience. Did you want to say something? I stepped onto the stage beside her with the manila folder tucked under one arm. No, I said calmly. I want you to read something. A few women exchanged glances. Audrey looked irritated already, mostly because anything unplanned offended her nervous system. Marilyn gave a soft, practiced laugh into the microphone. Well, maybe after dessert. No, now. The room went quiet enough to hear silverware touch china somewhere near the back tables. I placed the folder directly on the podium over Marilyn's handwritten speech notes. She looked down at it, then at me, still confident, still assuming she controlled the room. I knew that expression well. I'd seen the same thing during military network assessments right before administrators discovered their entire system had already been compromised. You've spent my entire life talking about bloodlines, I said evenly. The microphone wasn't in my hand, but I didn't need it yet. Years of briefing rooms taught me how to project without raising my voice. Marilyn smiled tightly. Evelyn, this isn't really the place. No, actually, this is the perfect place. That landed harder. Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. I continued. You've spent decades obsessing over purity, heritage, family genetics. You've made comments about my appearance since I was old enough to understand English. Audrey crossed her arms immediately. Oh my God, she muttered. Are we really doing this at my shower? I ignored her, because Audrey wasn't the center of this story anymore. Marilyn lowered her microphone slightly. You're upset. No. I'm accurate. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. There it was again, that word. I slid the folder closer toward her. Open it. Evelyn, open the folder. The room had gone completely silent now. No polite whispering. No fake laughter. Nothing. Even the string quartet near the wall had stopped playing mid-song like somebody cut the power. Marilyn stared at me for a long second before finally setting the microphone down on the podium. You're embarrassing yourself, she said quietly. Not today. She opened the folder, slowly, still trying to maintain dignity, still believing this was manageable. The laboratory paperwork sat neatly clipped together beneath the GenPath Diagnostics header. I watched her eyes scan the first page, then move lower, then stop completely. The change in her face happened fast, not dramatic. Worse, controlled panic, like a pilot realizing an engine failed while passengers are still ordering drinks. She flipped to the kinship analysis page and froze, 0.00%. The ballroom stayed dead silent. I could hear ice settling inside someone's glass near the windows. Marilyn looked back up at me too quickly. That's absurd. Her voice cracked slightly on the second word, tiny crack. But enough. You should keep reading, I said. Her hands tightened against the papers. No, there it was. Not confusion, recognition. She knew exactly what she was looking at. The realization hit me with strange emotional force, not sadness, not victory, confirmation. I turned slightly toward the audience. My mother has spent 32 years making comments about bloodlines and pure family genetics, I said calmly. Turns out there's a reason for that. Evelyn, Marilyn hissed. I finally picked up the microphone. The sound echoed softly through the ballroom speakers. I paid for an independent genetic analysis after she implied my son wasn't truly part of this family. Several women looked visibly uncomfortable now. Good. Discomfort was overdue. I kept my voice low and steady the same way I delivered cyber threat briefings during active breach assessments. No screaming, no theatrics. Facts sound scarier when they stay calm. The report confirmed my father was biologically related to me, I continued, but the probability of maternity between Marilyn Cross and myself came back at 0%. Audrey laughed once automatically. Short, nervous. That's impossible. I looked directly at her. No. Apparently your father cheated on your mother 32 years ago. Audrey's face lost color instantly. Marilyn slammed the folder shut. This is fabricated. The volume surprised everybody, because Marilyn didn't yell, ever. One woman near the front table physically flinched. I stayed perfectly still. The lab is accredited through the American Association of Blood Banks, as I said. Collection verification, chain of custody, documentation, full genetic exclusion markers. You can dispute my existence morally if you want. Scientifically, things are less flexible. A few shocked murmurs moved through the room. Marilyn grabbed the microphone from my hands, so suddenly the speakers screeched. This is a private family matter. No, I said evenly. You made it public every time you treated me like a defective copy of this family. The sentence landed hard, because everybody there had seen it. Maybe not openly. Maybe not consciously. But rich social circles notice hierarchy, the same way wolves notice limping animals. They knew. I stepped closer to the podium. You spent 32 years charging me for a debt I didn't owe, I said. For an affair my father committed. Every insult, every comment, every comparison to Audrey. Marilyn's breathing looked uneven now. Not emotional, cornered. You are not my mother. The words echoed across the ballroom. No music, no movement, nothing. Audrey slowly reached for the folder with visibly shaking fingers. Marilyn tried to pull it away. Too late. Audrey snatched the papers and started reading. I watched her eyes move down the page exactly the same way mine had days earlier. Confidence, confusion, then impact. Oh my God, she whispered. Marilyn turned toward her immediately. Audrey, you knew? That question came out small, childlike. For the first time in her entire life, Audrey looked genuinely unprotected. And suddenly, Marilyn Cross no longer looked like the queen of Crestview Country Club. She looked like an aging woman, standing under ballroom lighting while 30 years of lies cracked open in front of the exact audience she spent her life trying to impress. I stepped back from the podium while Audrey kept staring at the report like the words might rearrange themselves into something less humiliating. They didn't. DNA has a brutal lack of social manners. The ballroom stayed frozen. 40 women in pastel dresses sitting perfectly still while generations of fake prestige collapsed beside the dessert table. Somewhere near the back, a waiter quietly lowered a tray of champagne glasses onto a serving cart like he didn't want to. Become emotionally involved in rich people disasters. Smart man. Marilyn reached for the papers again. Audrey, give me that. No. That shocked me more than the screaming. Audrey never said no to Marilyn. Not really. Her entire personality had been professionally cultivated around obedience disguised as elegance. Marilyn forced a strained smile toward the room. There's clearly been some misunderstanding. Mom, Audrey said slowly, still reading, this says 0%. Her voice sounded thin. Smaller somehow, like someone had removed the expensive insulation around her entire life. Marilyn grabbed the microphone again with visibly shaking hands. This paperwork is fabricated, she announced sharply. I don't know what kind of stunt this is, but Evelyn has clearly become unstable. Interesting choice. Not wrong, just 30 years late. A few uncomfortable guests glanced toward me. I stayed calm. That made Marilyn look even worse. She pointed toward the folder dramatically. These kinds of online DNA kits can be manipulated. It wasn't an online kit, I said evenly. It was a full independent laboratory analysis with chain of custody verification. Marilyn ignored me completely. She's angry because she's always been resentful of this family. That one almost made me laugh. The woman had spent 3 decades treating me like a contaminated blood sample, and somehow still thought resentment was the surprising part. Audrey flipped through more pages. Clinical summaries, authentication seals, verification signatures. Every page made her face paler. Oh my God, again. Marilyn turned toward her too fast. Stop reading that garbage. It has official certification stamps. It's fake. It has Dad's DNA profile. Marilyn froze. There it was. The moment she realized the room had moved beyond denial, people were no longer shocked by the accusation. They were evaluating evidence. And rich people love evidence when it belongs to someone else's downfall. One woman near the front table quietly pulled out her phone under the tablecloth. Probably texting someone, maybe recording. Crestview women treated scandals like seasonal entertainment. Marilyn saw it too. That's when the panic really started. Not emotional panic, social panic. Her breathing became uneven while she scanned the room, realizing the audience witnessing this mattered more to her than the truth itself. I will not stand here and be extorted by my own daughter, she snapped suddenly. A few women blinked. Extorted? Interesting pivot. I crossed my arms calmly. I haven't asked you for anything. She wants money, Marilyn continued desperately. This entire performance is because she's bitter about family assets. One older woman near the center table frowned slightly. Everybody in that room knew I joined the army at 18 and barely attended family events unless legally cornered into it. The lie didn't fit, and Marilyn knew it didn't fit. That made her more frantic. She's always been difficult, Marilyn continued. Aggressive, defiant. She never appreciated anything this family gave her. I tilted my head slightly. You mean emotional neglect and a lifetime subscription to criticism? A couple nervous laughs slipped out accidentally before dying immediately. Marilyn looked around sharply, horrified anybody found that funny. Then Audrey lowered the papers slowly, and finally looked directly at her mother. You knew, she said. Not a question anymore, a statement. Marilyn's face hardened instantly, because beneath all the performance and etiquette and polished Southern manners, Marilyn Cross had always been ruled by one thing above everything else: pride, and pride turns vicious when cornered. She had his face, Marilyn snapped suddenly. The room went still again. Audrey stared at her. I didn't move. Marilyn laughed once. Sharp, bitter, completely humorless. You think this was easy for me, she demanded. You think I enjoyed spending 32 years raising proof that my husband humiliated me? There it was, the real voice. Not the country club voice, not the fundraiser voice. The actual woman underneath all the expensive fabric. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats while Marilyn kept going. Years of buried poison finally ripping through the surface. Thomas embarrassed me, she hissed. He destroyed this family before Evelyn was even born. She's standing right there, Audrey whispered. Oh, don't start acting morally shocked now. Marilyn pointed directly at me. I had to carry that shame publicly, while everyone whispered behind my back. Do you understand what that did to me? Nobody answered, because normal people don't usually prepare responses for public aristocratic meltdowns before lunch. Marilyn's voice rose higher. I should have left him. I know that now. But divorce would have destroyed the Cross name socially at the time, and his parents begged me to stay quiet. Every sentence made the room uglier, more real. I swallowed my pride, she continued. I protected this family. I protected our reputation. And in return, I had to spend decades raising a bastard child who looked more like his mistress every year. The sentence hit the ballroom like broken glass. Audrey physically stepped backward from her mother, actually stepped away from her. Like proximity itself suddenly felt dangerous. I watched Marilyn realize what she'd just done. Not morally, socially. The room no longer saw her as elegant, or refined, or admirable. Now she was just an angry old woman screaming about illegitimate children beside a 3-tier cake. The illusion shattered all at once. One guest quietly stood up and walked toward the exit, pretending to answer a phone call. Another woman stared into her champagne flute with the exhausted expression of somebody realizing brunch had become legally relevant. Audrey looked at me again, not superior, not smug, just stunned. My whole life, she said weakly. Yeah, I answered calmly. Mine too. Marilyn looked around desperately, searching for control that no longer existed. But once people see the machinery behind somebody's perfection, they can't unsee it. That's the dangerous thing about truth. It ruins presentation permanently. And standing there beneath the chandeliers with mascara beginning to crack under her eyes, Marilyn Cross no longer looked like the untouchable queen of Crestview Country Club. She looked exactly what she had spent 30 years hiding. A deeply humiliated woman who built an entire personality around punishing the wrong person. I picked up the manila folder while Marilyn kept talking. Not to me anymore, to the room, to herself. To whatever remained of the image she'd spent 30 years polishing like antique silver. You have no idea what I sacrificed. She snapped at nobody specifically. None of you do. The ballroom stayed painfully quiet. Not supportive quiet, embarrassed quiet. The kind people use when they suddenly realize they've been applauding the wrong person for decades. Audrey still stood frozen beside the podium, clutching the DNA report with both hands. Her mascara had started smudging near the corners of her eyes, though I honestly don't think she noticed. For the first time in her life, she looked unfinished, human. One of the older women near the front table finally stood up awkwardly. Maybe everyone should take a moment. No, Marilyn interrupted sharply. That made several heads turn immediately. Even now, she couldn't stop controlling the room. I will not be judged by people who don't understand what this family endured. Family. Interesting word choice considering the circumstances. I slid the folder under my arm and stepped away from the stage. Nobody tried to stop me, nobody even spoke. 40 wealthy women sat motionless among half-eaten pastries and untouched champagne, while the entire cross-family mythology bled out across imported table linens. Honestly, it was quieter than most funerals. Audrey looked at me as I passed her. Evelyn, I stopped briefly, not because I needed closure, because some part of me recognized she'd just lost the only reality she'd ever been taught. That's why she hated me, I said calmly. Audrey's face tightened immediately. No, she whispered automatically, but it lacked conviction. Because now she remembered things too. The comments, the comparisons, the strange imbalance none of us ever discussed openly, because rich families prefer emotional damage with good manners. She didn't hate you, Audrey said weakly. I looked toward Marilyn. She was still arguing with the room, still trying to regain control through volume and outrage. She spent 32 years punishing a child for somebody else's betrayal. I said quietly, "You can call that whatever helps you sleep at night." Audrey didn't answer. I walked past the dessert table near the ballroom entrance, while 2 catering staff members pretended very hard not to stare directly at anybody. One waiter suddenly became deeply fascinated by arranging strawberries. Professionalism under pressure, respect. The heavy oak doors at the front entrance came into view ahead of me. Beyond the glass panels, late afternoon sunlight stretched across the circular driveway outside the club. Normal life waited out there. Traffic, heat, car engines. People who didn't care about the collapse of Southern aristocracy before brunch. Behind me, Marilyn's voice finally cracked completely. "You think this makes you innocent?" she shouted suddenly. I stopped but didn't turn around. "You were always a reminder," she said. Every single day. There it was, the final truth. Not polished, not disguised, just ugly and exhausted. And strangely enough, hearing it out loud didn't hurt anymore. Because once somebody finally admits who they are, you stop wasting energy hoping they'll become better. I opened the heavy door. The ballroom noise immediately softened behind me like somebody lowering the volume on a television. Warm air hit my face. Outside, Julian leaned against our car, holding Leo against his chest exactly the same way he always did after the baby fell asleep. One arm under the body, gentle sway, protective without thinking about it. The second he saw my face, he straightened slightly. "You okay?" I looked back once through the glass doors. Inside, I could still see fragments of movement. Women whispering. Audrey sitting down suddenly in shock. Marilyn standing rigid near the podium while decades of carefully engineered perfection collapsed around her. Then the doors closed fully behind me. The noise disappeared. Just like that. No dramatic soundtrack. No screaming, just silence. Julian studied me carefully. "How bad was it?" I exhaled slowly. She told the truth eventually. "That sounds dangerous. You have no idea." He shifted Leo slightly higher against his shoulder. Our son stayed completely asleep through all of it. One tiny hand curled around the collar of Julian's shirt. Safe. That word hit differently now. Not expensive. Not prestigious. Safe. I reached over and touched Leo's warm cheek gently with the back of my fingers. Soft skin, sleepy breathing, total trust. No conditions attached. My entire life, I thought family was something you earned by behaving correctly around difficult people. That was the lie. Real family wasn't built through blood purity speeches or matching last names carved into country club donor walls. It was built through consistency, protection, respect. Julian opened the passenger door for me while I settled carefully into the seat. The leather was cracked near the center console because our car had over 140,000 miles on it and exactly one functioning cup holder. Still felt more honest than the entire ballroom behind us. Julian got into the driver's seat and started the engine. Neither of us rushed to speak. We just sat there for a second while the country club stood glowing behind us in the afternoon sun, looking polished and important and completely hollow. Then Julian glanced over. "So," he said carefully, "you think we're still invited for Christmas?" I laughed, actually laughed, the kind that escapes unexpectedly after carrying tension too long. "Probably not. Good." Their ham was always dry. He pulled the car slowly out of the circular driveway while valets pretended not to recognize us anymore. Fair enough. I watched the massive white facade of Crestview Country Club disappear through the passenger window as we turned onto the main road. I didn't wait to see whether Audrey canceled the rest of the shower. I didn't care how Marilyn explained the laboratory seasons to her friends. And I didn't need an apology anymore. For 32 years, I had lived like an unwanted ghost trapped inside someone else's perfect family portrait. Today, I finally walked out of the frame. The strange thing about finally telling the truth is that life still expects you to do laundry afterward. 3 days after the baby shower disaster at Crestview Country Club, I stood in my kitchen at 6:12 in the morning holding a leaking trash bag while Leo screamed like he was personally protesting sunrise. Julian walked in wearing sweatpants and one of my old army hoodies. "Coffee?" he asked. "Emotionally or physically?" Yes, that became our recovery process. Not dramatic speeches, not inspirational movie moments. Just regular life continuing while my nervous system slowly figured out it no longer had to survive my family. That took longer than I expected. People think freedom feels explosive when it first arrives, like fireworks or movie soundtracks. Honestly, it felt suspicious. Quiet felt suspicious. Nobody criticizing me felt suspicious. I caught myself checking my phone constantly during the first week after the confrontation, waiting for Marilyn to send some long manipulative message explaining why I was cruel, unstable, ungrateful, or mentally broken. Nothing came. Apparently, public humiliation temporarily disables socialites. Audrey texted once, "I'm still processing everything." That was it. No apology, no defense, just shock. And honestly, I understood that more than I expected to. Because once the emotional dust settled, I started realizing something uncomfortable. Audrey had grown up trapped too, just differently. People see golden children in toxic families and assume they have power. Most of the time, they don't. They're just rewarded prisoners. They learn very early that love only arrives when they perform correctly. Perfect grades, perfect manners, perfect image. One child gets punished openly. The other gets controlled quietly. Neither one grows up healthy. I learned that the hard way. Leo finally stopped crying after Julian carried him around the apartment explaining baseball statistics in a calm teacher voice, like our son was preparing for fantasy league drafts. I watched them from the kitchen and realized something that honestly embarrassed me a little. I had spent most of my adult life believing love was supposed to feel stressful, conditional, like something you could accidentally lose if you relaxed too much, because that's how Marilyn operated. Everything in that house came with emotional fine print. Praise came with comparison. Attention came with criticism. Even kindness felt rented. And when you grow up inside that kind of environment long enough, your brain starts treating tension like home. That's dangerous, really dangerous, especially for kids. I think that's why the army made sense to me so quickly at 18. Military life is hard, but at least the rules are honest. Nobody pretends loyalty exists when it doesn't. Nobody calls emotional manipulation family values. If someone trusted you overseas, it was because you earned it under pressure. You protected each other. You carried weight together. You stayed awake during ugly nights when systems failed and everyone looked exhausted and half feral from caffeine poisoning. That felt more like family than the Cross estate ever did. At Crestview, appearances mattered more than integrity. In the army, integrity mattered because people could actually get hurt without it. Big difference. One night, about 2 weeks after the confrontation, Julian found me sitting on the bathroom floor at almost midnight while Leo slept in his crib. "You okay?" he asked carefully. "Yeah." You're sitting beside toilet cleaner. I contain multitudes. He sat beside me anyway. That's another thing healthy people do. They sit with you without immediately trying to repair you. I stared at the tile floor for a while before finally saying the thing I'd been avoiding out loud. I think part of me kept trying to earn Marilyn's approval because I thought if I succeeded hard enough, maybe my childhood would finally make sense. Julian nodded slowly. That's pretty human. I became an Army cyber defense specialist because apparently emotional trauma and government security clearance pair beautifully together. Very efficient of you. I laughed quietly. Then I looked at him. You know what's insane? What? I actually thought there was something genetically wrong with me for years. Words sounded ridiculous once spoken aloud, but they were true. When somebody spends your entire life subtly treating you like contamination, eventually part of your brain starts cooperating with the accusation. That's how toxic family systems work. They repeat a role long enough that you start performing it automatically. The difficult daughter, the unstable son, the disappointment, the burden. And once people accept those roles emotionally, they stop questioning who assigned them in the first place. That realization changed something important for me, because after the DNA results, I finally understood the problem was never that I failed the family. The family itself was built around a lie nobody wanted to confront honestly. Marilyn wasn't protecting tradition. She was protecting humiliation. My father wasn't preserving family stability. He was preserving reputation. And I spent 3 decades carrying emotional punishment for choices I never made. That's the part I really want people watching this story to understand. Some families do not hurt you because you are weak. They hurt you because your existence interferes with the version of reality they desperately want to maintain. And if you spend enough years trying to earn acceptance from people committed to misunderstanding you, eventually you stop living your own life. You start managing theirs. That's no way to exist. A month after the confrontation, I caught myself laughing in the kitchen while Julian burned pancakes and Leo smeared banana across his own forehead like a tiny drunk painter. No tension, no judgment, no performance, just life. Messy, cheap, honest. And for the first time I can remember, I didn't feel like I was waiting for somebody to withdraw love from me. That changed everything. Because once you realize peace feels safer than approval, you stop chasing people who only know how to love conditionally. And honestly, that might have been the most important thing I learned from the entire disaster. I ignored my mother's first voicemail for 6 days. Not because I was scared to listen to it, because I already knew the script. Toxic families rarely improvise. The message came in at 8:43 on a Tuesday night while I was trying to assemble a stroller that apparently required an engineering degree and emotional resilience. Julian looked over from the couch. You gonna play it? Maybe when Leo graduates college, he snorted. Healthy coping mechanism. I learned from professionals. I finally listened to the voicemail later that night while folding baby laundry at the kitchen table. Marilyn sounded exhausted, not remorseful. Important difference. You've humiliated this family enough, she said. I think it's time you stop behaving emotionally and start acting like an adult. I actually laughed out loud. There's something deeply funny about being called emotional by a woman who publicly confessed to resenting a child for 32 years because her husband cheated. That's Olympic-level projection. The message continued for almost 4 minutes. Not one apology. Not one moment of accountability. Just reputation management. That's when I realized something I wish more people understood earlier in life. A lot of toxic parents are not trying to repair the relationship. They're trying to restore control. Huge difference. And people waste decades confusing the two. I did. For most of my life, I honestly believed if I just became successful enough, disciplined enough, calm enough, maybe Marilyn would finally love me normally. That's the trap. You start treating emotional acceptance like a performance review. You overachieve, you stay polite. You tolerate disrespect because you think patience eventually earns tenderness. Meanwhile, the other person quietly benefits from keeping you emotionally hungry. Because insecure people love relationships where they hold all the approval. That dynamic destroys people slowly, especially daughters. I know women in their 40s who still panic before calling their mothers. Successful women, smart women, women running businesses and raising children and paying mortgages. And one passive-aggressive comment from a parent still turns them into nervous 12-year-olds emotionally. That kind of damage doesn't disappear automatically just because you become an adult. You have to confront it intentionally. One Saturday morning, about 2 months after the confrontation, I took Leo grocery shopping alone because Julian was grading midterm essays and looked one caffeine shortage away from psychological collapse. I stood in the cereal aisle comparing formula prices like a Wall Street analyst during economic collapse when I heard someone say my name. I turned around. It was one of Marilyn's friends from Crestview, Patricia something, blonde, expensive sunglasses, the emotional energy of decorative furniture. "Oh," she said awkwardly. "Evelyn, Patricia." We both stood there beside discounted oatmeal, pretending life wasn't weird. Finally, she lowered her voice slightly. "Your mother's been having a very difficult time." Of course she had. Social consequences were finally happening. Poor thing. That sounds unfortunate. Patricia shifted uncomfortably. "Well, family situations are complicated. Some are. She says you refuse to speak with her. That part's true. She's still your mother." "No," I said calmly. "That's actually the entire issue." Patricia looked horrified. Not because I was wrong. Because rich social circles treat boundaries like felony offenses, especially when younger people enforce them against older family members. I pushed the shopping cart slightly forward. "She spent 32 years emotionally punishing me for something I had no control over," I said. "I'm not continuing that relationship just because society likes the word mother." Patricia blinked twice. People really struggle when you stop romanticizing harmful behavior, especially older generations. They were trained to survive dysfunction quietly. I used to think boundaries were cruel too. That's another lie toxic families teach you. They convince you protecting yourself is somehow selfish while they continue hurting you comfortably. Healthy people don't punish boundaries. Manipulative people do. That realization changed my entire life. I stopped answering calls immediately, stopped over-explaining decisions, stopped attending gatherings where I knew humiliation would be disguised as humor. And honestly, nothing catastrophic happened. The sky didn't split open. The FBI didn't arrest me for disappointing Southern socialites. Turns out peace gets easier once you stop asking permission for it. That doesn't mean healing feels good all the time. Sometimes it feels lonely. Sometimes guilt sneaks in around stupid things. A family photo. A holiday commercial. Seeing mothers and daughters laughing together in public while your own relationship feels emotionally radioactive. One night, I found myself crying over absolutely nothing while unloading the dishwasher. Julian walked in halfway through and immediately looked alarmed. "What happened?" "I don't know," I admitted. A spoon emotionally overwhelmed me. He hugged me anyway. That's what emotionally safe people do. They don't demand polished grief. They just stay. And staying matters more than perfect words ever will. The hardest thing I had to accept was this. Marilyn was humiliated by my father's betrayal, yes. But instead of confronting the person who caused the damage, she redirected decades of resentment toward the safest target available, me. Children in toxic families become emotional shock absorbers for unresolved adult pain all the time. That cycle repeats constantly unless somebody finally refuses to continue it. That became my responsibility after Leo was born. Because once you hold your own child for the first time, certain behaviors stop looking complicated. They start looking unacceptable. I could not imagine spending decades making my son feel unwanted because of somebody else's choices. Couldn't do it. Wouldn't do it. That's why exposing the truth stopped being about revenge eventually. It became about interruption. Stopping the cycle before it reached another generation. And if anybody watching this story needs to hear it, here's the honest truth. You are not required to destroy yourself emotionally just because someone shares your DNA. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to leave conversations that hurt you. You are allowed to stop begging difficult people to love you correctly. And you are absolutely allowed to build a life that feels calmer after you walk through your own front door. That isn't selfish. That's survival. Julian burned the pancakes again the morning Leo learned how to crawl properly. Not slightly burned, absolutely destroyed. The smoke alarm started screaming while Leo sat on the kitchen floor, laughing like arson was part of breakfast. Julian waved a dish towel toward the ceiling. In my defense, I got distracted by tiny human movement. "You teach history for a living," I said. "Multitasking should be your entire profession." I teach teenagers. Most of them can't locate Ohio on a map. Fair point. Leo crawled directly toward the dog bowl we kept for a Labrador we no longer owned, because apparently babies operate entirely through suicidal curiosity. I scooped him up halfway across the kitchen, while Julian scraped blackened pancake remains into the trash with the exhausted dignity of a defeated soldier. And standing there in mismatched socks, holding a drooling baby while our apartment smelled like burnt butter and cheap coffee, I had a realization that honestly hit harder than the DNA report. This was the safest home I had ever lived in. Not the nicest, definitely not the cleanest, but safe. Nobody monitored each other emotionally here. Nobody weaponized silence. Nobody walked into rooms wondering who would become the target that day. The apartment still had uneven flooring near the bathroom door. The upstairs neighbor still vacuumed at psychotic hours. Our couch still leaned slightly to one side because we bought it secondhand from a military couple moving to Arizona. Didn't matter. Peace changes what impresses you. About 4 months passed after the country club confrontation before Audrey finally called me directly. I almost didn't answer, not because I hated her, because I genuinely didn't know who she was without Marilyn standing behind her like a human operating system. The call came while I was folding laundry during Leo's afternoon nap. "Hey," Audrey said awkwardly. No polished confidant, no social performance, just awkward. Honestly, refreshing. "Hey." Silence stretched for a few seconds. Then she asked quietly, "Did you always know something was wrong?" I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. "No," I admitted. "I just knew I always felt unwanted." Another long pause. "I didn't see it," she said. "I know. That sounds worse somehow. Maybe this is." Golden children in toxic families often grow up emotionally blind because survival depends on not examining the system too carefully. Audrey had spent her entire life being rewarded for maintaining the illusion. I spent mine surviving outside it. Different damage. Same family. "You know she's blaming Dad completely now," Audrey said eventually, because blaming herself would require character development. That got an unexpected laugh out of her. Small, tired, real. "She's furious you embarrassed her publicly." I looked over toward Leo's baby monitor blinking softly on the counter. "No," I said calmly. "She's furious the truth became public. Those are different things." Audrey didn't argue, because deep down, she knew it too. We talked for almost 40 minutes that day, not magically healed sister conversation. No emotional movie soundtrack. Just two adults slowly realizing neither of us actually understood the environment we were raised in until it exploded publicly. Before hanging up, Audrey asked us something quietly. "Do you think Mom ever loved either of us normally?" That one hurt. Not because I had the answer, because I didn't. "I think she loved control," I said honestly, and I think she confused that with love for a very long time. After the call ended, I sat there thinking about how many families operate exactly like that. People controlling each other through guilt, through obligation, through approval, and everyone calling it love because the alternative feels too painful to admit. That's why I wanted to make these final parts of the story more direct instead of leaving everything hidden inside drama. Because people watching this need to hear something clearly. A peaceful home matters more than an impressive one. A calm relationship matters more than a socially approved one, and the people who make you feel emotionally safe are worth more than the people who only make you feel emotionally evaluated. I learned that embarrassingly late. For most of my life, I thought success looked like Marilyn's world. Country clubs, perfect hosting, elite social circles, carefully maintained appearances. Now, success looks completely different to me. It looks like Julian warming up Leo's bottle at 2:11 in the morning without complaining once. It looks like being able to disagree without emotional punishment. It looks like laughing inside your own kitchen instead of performing inside somebody else's dining room. It looks like my son growing up without fear attached to affection. That became the most important thing, breaking the cycle before it reached him. One evening not long ago, I caught Leo half asleep against Julian's chest while Julian graded papers with red ink all over his hands. The apartment was quiet except for rain hitting the windows and some terrible reality cooking show playing softly in the background. Julian looked up from the essays. "What?" I realized I'd been staring at them silently for almost 30 seconds. "Nothing," I said, just thinking, dangerous hobby. I smiled. Then I looked down at Leo resting peacefully against his father's shoulder. No tension in his tiny body, no instinct to earn affection, no fear. And suddenly I understood something with complete clarity. Blood can create relatives. But respect creates family. Some people share your DNA and still poison your spirit every time they walk into a room. And some people enter your life with absolutely no biological connection at all and become the safest place you've ever known. That's the real lesson underneath this entire story. Not revenge, not humiliation, freedom. The freedom to stop begging difficult people to love you properly. The freedom to build a quieter life instead. And honestly, that freedom feels better than winning ever could. So if you stayed through this entire story, thank you. And if you enjoy stories about complicated families, emotional healing, quiet strength, and people finally reclaiming their self-worth after years of manipulation, subscribe to the channel. There are a lot more stories like this coming next.